Hello, fellow mech warriors, Mage Leader here. I hope you're all doing utterly fantastic this evening, or whatever time of day it may happen to be when and where you are watching this video. Today I wanted to talk about something that's kind of come up in my discussions with other people in the Battletech community. Now, I'm sure I don't have to tell you, or repeat myself for the 5 billionth time, but there's a lot of new people coming into Battletech lately, and we've been teaching a lot of them how to play the game. Now, Battletech has been around for a long time, and unlike other games which have, additions where you have one rule set and then that rule set gets replaced by another later, Battletech is more cumulative, where it's just had stuff added and added and added and added and revised here and there, but for the most part it's just kind of been built on without actually changing additions. So the end result of that is that you have a very complex, very complicated series of rules that can be incredibly overwhelming for a new person coming in. So I thought that I'd take a brief look and say, for the new people, where do you get started when it comes to playing this game on the tabletop? Now, that seems like a pretty simple question to answer on the face of it. Dive right into the basic rule set and just have a good time. But there's a little bit more to it than that, and it kind of depends on how you got into Battletech, what you're looking to get out of it, where your tabletop experience lies. I'm going to kind of touch on each of the different approaches and what I think is the best fit for each of your starting points. So to begin, we'll start with people who've never ever heard of Battletech before. They've never played a tabletop game before. They have no idea what they're getting into. Maybe they're one of those people who's into tabletop gaming because they played Settlers of Catan, which, as we all know, is the gateway drug to the tabletop community for a lot of people. So, these are people who know how to play board games, and maybe even games with miniatures, but they're not experienced wargamers. For them, I would actually suggest the classic Battletech rule set. This is a game that actually quite a bit resembles a board game in a lot of ways. You have determined spaces and ways that you move around those spaces. It's a lot like a board game. You roll the dice, and you look at your stats, you make sure that you know how far you can advance and what those points are spent on and how you move around the game board. So it's very simple to understand if you're already familiar with how board games work. And it also means that if you're used to playing the more complicated board games, you might not have such a difficult time wrapping your head around the rule set. If you don't have that experience, the neat thing about classic Battletech is while it looks incredibly overwhelming on the surface of it, it's actually a very adaptable rule set. The game can be as shallow or as deep as you want it to be. You can calculate every single movement that your mech takes to the point where, you're rolling dice to determine if you fall flat on your face every time you take a step, if you really want to go that route. A slight exaggeration, but it almost goes that deep sometimes. You can have it be that granular and detailed if you want, or you can have it be incredibly basic to the point where you don't even bother with heat values. I don't know why you'd play the game that way, but if you want to, there it is. Or I guess if you don't want to deal with heat, you could just play clan mechs. But if it's incredibly customizable, so you can get it to your comfort level as long as your opponent agrees, which most people are pretty easygoing about that. If your opponent agrees with you, you can just plug in whichever rules you want, ignore whichever ones you don't want, and go with it from there. So that's something that I recommend if you're looking to get into classic Battletech and you're looking through those rule books and you're just completely flabbergasted by the minutia of it all and just how much there is to keep track of. Don't sweat it. You can work your way up to that and just start with something more basic. Now, the box sets that you can get right now that are currently being produced by Catalyst, they come with a basic rule set. I don't recommend the one that comes in the $20 starter box because, as I mentioned before, no heat. And I think the game kind of becomes pointless when you don't have to manage your heat. But the ones that come in the Game of Armored Combat box, those rules, I think, are just about right for a starting point if you've never experienced any sort of tabletop war game before, that's a great way to get introduced to Battletech and how it works. It's decent for everyone, but there's another thing that I want to talk about. There's people who are coming into Battletech from other war games, specifically 40K. I know there's a huge wave of people that are checking out Battletech now, especially after the big oopsie that happened. But for those people, they have some experience with war games and how they work, typically, or at least how theirs works. And for them, it might actually be a little bit harder to get into classic Battletech because of how different it is from 40K. And if that's like the only war game that you've played, it's going to feel very alien to you. For those people, what I recommend is actually Alpha Strike. Alpha Strike is sort of a spin-off game, I guess you could say, of Battletech. It's more of an alternate way to play with your miniatures. Miniatures from either game can be used in either game. They made some miniatures for a while that were kind of designed around Alpha Strike, and they don't have a full hex base. Those can still be used for the classic Battletech hex maps, but they obviously don't fit in the hexes. You can still make it work, but you don't have to feel like they're exclusive to Alpha Strike. So, and then of course the classic Battletech miniatures work perfectly fine in Alpha Strike as well. So you can your miniatures will migrate between those just fine. So there's some big differences between how Alpha Strike plays as compared to classic Battletech. Classic Battletech is much more complex than Alpha Strike is. Alpha Strike is purposely designed to be a more streamlined and accessible version of Battletech. It's also debatably less popular than the classic rule set among the core fan base. There's something of a debate in the Battletech community about which one is the better game, not as much as there used to be. Now, people will usually play a good mix of both games, but a lot of people consider this to be the starting place for Battletech. I think it depends on where you're coming from and what you expect to get out of the game, but it is definitely a simpler and more accessible rule set. So one of the biggest differences that you'll notice when you play Alpha Strike as compared to classic Battletech is actually how you move around the board. So in Battletech, everything is determined by the hex map. It's all about moving around those beautiful little hexagons. So your movement points will determine how many hexes you can move, as well as what directions you can face, because you're spending points to turn your mech around and everything like that. So in Alpha Strike, facing doesn't matter quite as much. There's still back attacks and things like that, but you're not spending movement points to get yourself turned around. You just are making sure that you're facing the correct way beforehand, so you're not giving your enemy an advantage. So in Alpha Strike, you move around a lot like you do in 40K. You have a set stat for your unit in inches, and you take out a tape measure down on the table and you measure out where you can move. It's very, very similar to a lot of more traditional war games in that respect. So it'll feel very familiar with how it plays. So I kind of recommend that as a starting point for people who have experience with other war games, because it's going to be a little bit less alienating for you going in. Now, that doesn't mean you can't start with classic Battletech, or even that you'll have a tough time when you get there, because they're both perfectly serviceable war games that anybody can learn to play. So don't feel like, classic Battletech is too hard and you should start with Alpha Strike. I'm just saying that you might find it to be a little bit more familiar, maybe a little more comfortable, to kind of ease yourself into the more in-depth and detailed stuff that you find in the classic rule set. But I mean, if you're very confident in your ability to pick up a new set of rules, or you play like a bunch of different game systems, then don't hesitate to just jump straight into classic rule set and give that a shot. But I'm going to put another asterisk here, because these are two very different styles of play, and I feel like they suit two very different kinds of scenarios. So it depends on what kind of game you're looking to play. So, in Battletech, you can have any number of units fighting each other that you want. It's a good base for that kind of thing. So if you want to have giant company-sized forces, and you're talking like 4 or 5 lances of mechs, and then you've got tanks over here, and aircraft over here, and infantry over here, all the combined arms stuff you want. Classic Battletech has rules for that, and you can have a wonderful simulated game that will take you literal days to finish, because you will be rolling for everything on that board every single turn, and you will be simulating every aspect of that. If that's your jam, you can do that in Classic Battletech. That's not the default way to play the game, but it is an option if that's your jam. If you're like me and you like a game that size, but you'd rather have it be something that you can actually play in a single day, or you don't have that kind of time to invest in something like that, or that sounds like it'd be way too much information to handle in your brain all at once because I have the big dumb brain. If that's kind of where you're at, then I would say that the best way to play that style of game is with Alpha Strike. In Alpha Strike, everything about your mech is simplified down onto a single card. So you might have seen the giant record sheets for Classic Battletech where you've got the diagram of your mech, you've got all the different pips that you fill out as it takes damage, calculating the likelihood of hitting internal systems and what that's going to do to your mech. All that stuff, it's more or less gone. And instead what you have is the Alpha Strike card, which has your armor value and your internal structure value. This is for your entire mech, not components. So everything is shrunk down onto this little card. You'll find that mechs deal damage quicker, they die quicker, but that also means that you can have much larger scale games and get through them in a manner that is actually somewhat feasible given the normal person's schedule. So there's a lot less information to keep track of, so it's easier to have a game that's bigger with Alpha Strike. So if you're looking to have a giant army of miniatures and just a table full of models like you would have had in 40K or Bolt Action or insert Song of Ice and Fire, whatever war game it is that you play where you have lots of guys on the table at once, if that's something you want to get out of Battletech, I'd recommend that you do so with Alpha Strike for most people. If you like simulating every single detail of every little thing, and your opponent does too, more power to you. Classic Battletech will let you do that. But for the newcomers to the genre, to this particular game, I'd recommend doing it with Alpha Strike. The nice thing about playing Alpha Strike versus Classic Battletech rules is that when you buy the miniatures now, both options are available to you right out of the gate. When you buy the box sets that are currently available, you actually get the Alpha Strike cards for those mechs along with the record sheets. So right out of the gate, you're ready to play both systems. The downside is that the sets don't include the Alpha Strike rules. That's actually in its own separate book. But you can probably find a guide online on how to play. The game is very simple. I don't think you actually need the manual to play the game. If you want to do something like make your own mercenary company and give them all stats, and unique traits depending on what you think that your merc outfit would be, so you can do like a campaign, that kind of thing, then I would recommend getting that book. But you don't really need it to play the basic game. You can find an example of how to play on YouTube. There's lots of other creators on here that have done a guide. I might even touch on it at some point. But it's much easier to kind of get yourself in the groove of playing that game than the Classic Battletech rules. So when you're looking through your box and you don't see a guide on how to play Alpha Strike, don't panic. That stuff is everywhere. Very easy to find. But that all being said, Alpha Strike, while it is one of my favorite ways to play the game, it's not necessarily the best, depending on what you want to do. So let's say, for example, you got the $20 starter box set, and you've got a Wolverine and a Griffin in there. That's 2 mechs, so you got one, your opponent has one, and you decide you're going to duke it out. I do not recommend using Alpha Strike for this. The game will be over in maybe 10 minutes, and you'll both walk away pretty disappointed in what you played, because it will just be a very quick roll a couple dice and pick the things off the table type of game. Where I think Classic Battletech rules really shine is in duels. One-on-one mech fights are fantastic with classic Battletech rules because you have complete control over your battle mech. I also think it's good for maybe one lance versus one lance. That's a game that'll take you a few hours to get through, but it'll be pretty fun the whole time because you have control over every single person in your lance and everything that they do. I'd say 2 lances is probably pushing it a little bit for what this game is able to do in a sort of quick and fun kind of manner. I mean, granted, if you have 1 lance, it's going to take you quite a while to get through a game, but anything beyond 2 lances, you're probably going to be playing it in multiple sessions because it takes time to calculate every single aspect of your mechs and to roll against all the different charts to determine where your weapons go. Some people love that kind of thing. I am actually one of them. I like taking control of my lance and having, complete control over every single aspect of each of their war machines and pushing them to the absolute limit to get every single round out of them. There's a lot of strategizing, getting custom loadouts for your mechs and making sure you have the right balance of the right kinds of weapons for the right kinds of scenarios. There's a more strategic depth in classic Battletech than there is in Alpha Strike, and I think it's fantastic for that kind of thing, but that's not everybody's jam. Some people like a game where they put down the miniatures, and there's still strategy involved with filling out your force with the right kinds of mechs. Some of them are better up close, some are better at range, some are tougher but slower. Making sure that you have the right kind of force organized against what your objective is going to be. That's still there, but you're not picking out like what weapon you have and what body part it's mounted on and how many heat sinks you have and how well you manage your heat, because in Alpha Strike there is no heat. Every mech is firing every weapon every turn, which I know I criticized earlier in the video, but in Alpha Strike it works because the strategy in that game is more about your positioning and who gets to go first and who's got better luck of rolling the dice than it is, what weapon you fire which turn, which in classic Battletech rules you declare which weapons you're using, and that determines how much heat you generate, and that determines at what point your mech's going to start overloading and taking damage from firing too many of its weapons at once. You have to pace yourself and make sure that you're not actually pushing your mech to the brink of blowing itself to pieces. So that's a whole new level of strategic depth, and while I find that to be incredibly fun, if I want to bring in a giant company of battle mechs and tanks, it's probably going to get a little bit old, because then I'm picking out individual weapons and managing heat and ammo capacity for every single unit on that table. That takes a long time to calculate. It makes you keep track of a lot of stuff. You have a ton of charts sitting on the table that you have to fill out as you play. It can get overwhelming to the point where it kind of overrides the fun that is presented by the strategy, at least for me. So if you're looking to put out large numbers of forces on the table and have big armies, Alpha Strike is probably the better way to go about that. If you want to have a one-on-one duel, or you have your lance against your opponent's lance, and maybe you don't have a lot of miniatures up front and out of the gate, then classic Battletech rules are a great way to start. And again, they're so easy to customize that you can take a larger battle and still make it playable. You'll just have to take the extra time to prep it and get everything running smoothly. And of course, my biggest recommendation is to try both of these systems and find whichever one you have the most fun with. Most of the guys who have been in this hobby for a long time will bounce back and forth between each one. Sometimes, even I will like to play a giant force battle with classic rules just to see what happens, because crazy things can happen when every single thing is a stat that you roll against. You can have just insane moments where, you fire an autocannon and you headshot something in one turn and bring it down, David and Goliath style, with a tiny mech defeating a bigger one just by getting a really good shot. Or you can push your mech to the absolute brink to where it's almost melting from the heat just to get that one last shot in. And, you're begging and praying and hoping that that's the one that brings your enemy down. That sort of thing happens in classic Battletech a lot more than it does in Alpha Strike. But in Alpha Strike, you can get that gigantic scale a lot easier, and it's also a lot more relatable to people who have played other war games that work in a similar way. So that kind of brings me back around to the initial question, which one of these should you play? And I would say that definitely depends on what you're looking for in Battletech. So if you just bought the starter box with its little tiny instructional rulebook and 2 mechs and that's what you have, I would definitely recommend getting the core rulebook and trying your hand at getting the right amount of these rules. And don't feel like you need to go super in depth, but get like the basics of it down and play with that rule set, because you're probably going to have a lot more fun with your limited number of miniatures that way. If you bought the game of Armored Combat, I'd say it's a good idea to try both rule sets, because it's one lance on one lance, which can be fun in either rule set. And then if you want to have a much bigger game, you've been buying up all these miniatures just because you like how they look, or you're obsessed with painting and all that other type of stuff, then I would say definitely go with Alpha Strike, and then maybe play Classic Battletech with smaller forces to see which one you think is better for you, because you might actually still like the big force with the old rule set, the more complicated stuff. But you'll probably have more fun simplifying things down, streamlining it. You'll get something that's more fast-paced, you'll get something that's more immediately gratifying, though it won't be quite as strategically deep as what else is offered. So again, it comes down to what you're looking for when you play this game. So I hope that you found our little one-sided discussion to be at least somewhat helpful if you're brand new to this game and you're looking at those rules and you're thinking that they look super intimidating. I hope that now you have at least a sort of direction to look in and kind of know where to get started. And if you are looking for somebody to actually help you walk through this and actually learn the rules and teach you how to formulate some strategies and how to build out your forces, I'd recommend joining the Everything Battletech Discord. There are guys in there that will actually sit with you and teach you how the game works. We have a fantastic community of just really supportive people on that server. I cannot recommend it enough. They've helped me out quite a bit, because I've mentioned before, I'm a fairly new convert to the game as well. Some of these guys are the ones who taught me how to play Classic Battletech and Alpha Strike. They'll get you started, they'll tell you exactly where you need to go, they've got lots of useful links to online resources as well. It's just a wonderful, wonderful place for new people, and we're always looking to share our hobby with more and more folks out there. So if you have any doubts at all or any questions at all, that's probably the best place to ask them. Just keep in mind that it has gotten a little bit busy in that server at times, so you might have to wait your turn and be patient a little bit, but there are guys there who are more than willing to get a bunch of new folks together in a game, sit down, talk everything out, and just have a blast getting into this game. But with this, I hope that you'll at least have sort of an idea of where you want to start, to give them an idea of how to start teaching you how to really get the most out of your Battletech experience. So, whether you're looking to simulate an entire planet-spanning campaign down to the most minute detail, or you want to have 2 guys on Solaris 7 slugging it out in the arena and make sure that every single shot counts, or you just want to have a quick game where you sit down with your buddy and you blow his stuff off the table in the span of about a half hour, there's something for you in Battletech. Until next time, this is Mage Leader, signing off.